Good day. My name is Tammy Warren, and I am the Senior Marine Resources Officer at the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. In this presentation, for the most part, I will be explaining the current situation with regards to fisheries licensing and monitoring. I will highlight the objectives that relate to these matters in the draft Marine Spatial Plan and summarize the feedback gathered so far on these topics. I will also touch briefly on the monitoring of the wider marine environment and on tourism monitoring as well. One of the main goals of the Marine Spatial Plan is to facilitate sustainable commercial and recreational fisheries. There are a couple of spatial objectives in the draft plan that relate to this goal, and they were used to guide the development of the marine protected areas maps. However, there is also a non-spatial objective that speaks to developing a licensing structure that will allow for better monitoring and reporting of catches. Stakeholders felt that an updated licensing structure would lead to better reporting as it relates to quotas and better management of fish stocks to ensure sustainable fisheries, both commercial and recreational. As the director mentioned in his presentation on improving Bermuda's marine resources enforcement, under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Bermuda has sovereign rights within its EEZ for the purposes of exploring, exploiting, conserving, and managing natural resources of the water and seabed, and exploitation and exploration of the zone for energy production, and jurisdiction with regard to marine scientific research and protection of the marine environment. Bermuda has full sovereignty within its territorial sea limit of 12 nautical miles. Fisheries management in Bermuda has been divided into two major categories: management of reef fish and shellfish stocks, such as red hind and spiny lobster, which are largely caught on the Bermuda platform, and the management of pelagic species such as tunas and wahoos, which are found in deeper waters throughout the EEZ. Per the law of the sea, the management of pelagic species must be done in collaboration with other countries, as these species are highly migratory and swim all over the Atlantic Ocean, so cannot be managed by any one country. The organization responsible for the management of pelagic species in the Atlantic is the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. Currently, local fisheries management is largely restricted to the use of input measures, which limit the amount and type of effort that goes into fishing. These measures include a cap on the number of commercial fishing vessels, a limit on the number of lobster participants, and a limit on the number of traps in use in the lobster trap fisheries. There are also some basic limits on catch, output controls, we call them as well, such as minimum fish size regulations and bag limits. All of these measures are common in small-scale fisheries like Bermuda's, which often have limited resources, but a large number of species to manage. Once an issue is identified, the fisheries management process in Bermuda involves several steps: gathering and analyzing scientific data, getting additional input and advice from the Marine Resources Board and Commercial Fisheries Council, getting political agreement from the minister and cabinet, and finally implementing management measures through legislation and terms and conditions. In order to fish commercially in Bermuda, a commercial fishing vessel license is required. As mentioned earlier, there is a cap on fishing vessel licenses. So anyone wishing to get into the industry must get a license from someone who is getting out. In 2021, there were 178 active licenses, although there were 195 fishing vessel licenses in total. And I've used 2021 because we're still compiling the data for 2022 into the different vessel types and lengths. So anyone who owns a commercial fishing vessel must also be registered as a fisherman, and their crew and vessel operators must also be registered. Again, in 2021, there were 290 registered fishermen, and one person was permitted to register as a fisherman to provide shoreline fishing tours. There are also special licenses that are required under the fisheries legislation for certain types of fishing gear and that are governed by distinct terms and conditions. These are pelagic longline, spiny lobster traps, guinea chick trap, vertical line for deep water fish species, shark horizontal lines, and shark hand lines. So there are a number of regulations in place for commercial fisheries. And as I said earlier, there are minimum sizes. So you can see there are a number of fish species that have minimum sizes, including the black grouper and red hind and yellowtail snapper. There are also bag limits, and there are different bag limits on some species for commercial versus recreational. And those are the red hind for commercial, there's 50 fish per boat per day during the month of April, and then 10 fish per boat per day from May 1st to August 31st. And there is no commercial bag limit on lane snapper. So there are also restricted species. So fishing for bonefish and pompano is only permitted with hook and line. And a special license is required in order to take and retain sharks now of 3 species, Galapagos, the gummy sharks, and the 6-gill sharks. And terms and conditions, as I said earlier, applied to these licenses. There are other protected species that cannot be taken at all. And those are turtles, mammals, corals, and a number of species. I won't go through all of them. And again, all shark species now except those that are covered by the special license. So commercial fishers may hold a recreational spearfishing or lobster diver license, but they must abide by all of the relevant terms and conditions. Commercial trap fisheries for spiny lobster and guinea chick are limited entry, and full-time commercial fishers can apply for these when places become available. And there, of course, there's a season for these fisheries as well. And holders of these licenses cannot hold a recreational lobster diver license. There are also gear restrictions on nets, long lines, and fixed gear. Commercial cast nets can be of any size, but whole nets have a restriction. They can't exceed 150 feet and 18 feet deep. And then bait nets in Harrington Sound must not have a drop greater than 12 feet deep. And use of more than 5 hooks constitutes a long line, and this is restricted gear again and requires a license. And fixed gear of any kind, such as pots and fixed nets, fixed lines, is prohibited except under a special license. There are areas closed to fishing. So there are bays that are closed to netting, Somerset Bay, Shelley Bay, Whalebone Bay, and Coop Pond. And there are other areas that are closed permanently to fishing. In this this image on the right, you can see the circles, and those are areas that are permanently closed to fishing. And then that hashed area in the center there is the coral reef preserve, and it's just prohibited to take or damage any organism that is attached to the seabed. Then there's the special closure off of St. George's, the Blue Stripe Grunt area that's closed from 1st of May through 30th of June. And that's to protect breeding fishes. And then there's also the seasonally protected areas, and at the west end and at the east end. And those are normally closed from April 15th through August 14th. And then the smaller areas outlined in black, the black grouper boxes that are closed through November 30th. And you can troll for game fish outside of the 30 fathom depth contour. So for all fisheries, commercial fishermen are required to report their catching effort, meaning the amount of time they spend fishing and the gear they use to the department. So this slide shows on the left the statistics form for finfish, from reef fish to pelagic fish and bait fish. And on the right, the statistics form for the spiny lobster trap fishery. Fishermen can also report their catches online, and we encourage this. However, a number of fishermen still use the paper forms to report their catches. With regard to recreational fisheries, there are currently no licenses required for local hook and line fishing from vessels or the shoreline. However, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources is developing a paper for approval by the Minister and Cabinet to implement hook and line fishing licenses for residents. Foreign hook and line sports fishing vessels are already required to license. And most of these vessels come in for the marlin tournaments each year and are only permitted to fish for pelagic species. A few of the vessel owners also bring smaller vessels, which we call ancillary vessels, and these are licensed to fish on the reef platform. Local residents are required to get licenses to catch lobsters and to spearfish, and these licenses are not available to visitors. And as you can see, last year, there were 340 licenses available for lobster diving. I don't think we had all 340 issued. The spearfishing, that figure is from 2021 because the 2022-23 season, we can still license the fishers up until the end of August because the season goes from 1st of September to the end of August. So for 2021, there were 150 spearfishing licenses issued. And then you have the foreign sports fishing vessels. As I said, there were 35 of them that came in last summer and 5 ancillary vessels. So again, recreational fishers are required to adhere to certain regulations, and the minimum sizes of fish are the same for recreational fishers. Bag limits, again, there's a 30 fish per boat per day of lane snapper that is different from the commercial fisheries, and a 10 fish per boat per day year-round bag limit of red hind, and those are different from commercial fisheries. And for both of them, again, black grouper is 1 fish per boat per day, and the yellowmouth grouper 1 fish per boat per day. Again, restricted species, bonefish and pompano are only permitted with hook and line, and protected species, all of those are the same as in the commercial, except that recreational fishers are now not permitted to take any sharks, even with a license. As I said, spearfishing requires a license, and only pole spear may be used. No spear guns or Hawaiian slings. Scuba cannot be used to take fish, and spearfishing may not be conducted within 1 nautical mile of the shore. Recreational lobster diving requires a license. Only a noose can be used. Lobsters cannot be spared. Scuba cannot be used. And there's a season for lobsters, again, from September 1 to the end of March. So lobsters can't be taken from 1st of April to end of August. Gear restrictions for recreational fishers. They can use a cast net up to 8 foot in diameter, and other nets are not permitted. A vessel may not have more than a total of 5 hooks in the water at a time, and fishing gear of any kind is not permitted. So recreational lobster divers and spearfishers are required to report their catch and effort online, and this slide shows the online form for reporting lobster diver catch. When it comes to monitoring fish catches and gathering the data needed for management purposes, there are some challenges. As Director Pettit mentioned in his enforcement presentation, there are numerous landing sites that stretch across the island. Indicated on this slide are the landing sites that we know are used by commercial fishermen. There are many more landing spots when you factor in landings by recreational fishers. Additionally, fish can be landed around the island at all hours of the day and night. So this situation and the fact that for all but the specialized fisheries, there are no requirements for fishermen to cooperate with scientific sampling, the establishment of a scientifically sound monitoring program has been hindered over the years. In 2018, before the BOP process started, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources developed an action plan in collaboration with the U.S. Fisheries consultant, which outlines the steps that we think are needed to improve the department's ability to actively manage Bermuda's fisheries resources. The focus was on the management of lobster and nearshore finfish, since ICAT is responsible for managing tunas and other pelagic species. In order to progress this work, however, we noted that we would need additional staff and funds and collaborative partnerships with other scientists. So the first steps in the action plan were to evaluate existing information. And an initial look at historical data sets has highlighted patchy collection of data over time and a dependence on opportunistic sampling and self-reported data. However, we did find some length frequency data collected in the 1990s that could possibly be used to calculate mortality estimates for that period and provide useful comparisons to mortality rates today. The next step was to conduct a comprehensive review of comparable management in similar jurisdictions, and to compile a database of life history parameters such as age, growth, mortality for priority fishery target species. Many of the management approaches and methods used to evaluate stock status or assess the risk to a stock of overfishing require these parameters. We then looked at what we could do with the data that we have or can easily get with additional resources. This led us to consider conducting management strategy evaluations on priority species. These are commonly used in situations where a lack of data or resources precludes full stock assessments. Management strategy evaluation is a computer monitoring tool that uses what is known about the stock, such as the life history of the species and the characteristics of the fishery, to simulate what would happen in a given set of circumstances. In order to get more local life history data, we need to develop a sampling program. In the short term, we would mainly collect length frequency data from priority species that can be used to estimate mortality rates and provide a baseline for future stock assessments and management efforts. Collection of other data will be more time-consuming. The final steps recognize the need to conduct outreach to encourage better reporting and improve the level of detail in self-reported data collected from the commercial fishery. If recreational fishing hook and line licenses are implemented, then we would also get catch and effort reports from those recreational fishers, and it would then be useful to also sample their catches. During the development of the Marine Spatial Plan, one of the priorities expressed by many stakeholders was for regular stock assessments to be conducted on priority species. The below graphic on the right indicates the inputs needed for some stock assessment methods, including surveys, catch per unit effort data, age and size data, growth data, maturity data, catch data from logbooks and self-reported statistics, and data from observers. As much of this data is not available for even key species in Bermuda, the priority as indicated in the last slide would be to get size data to combine with catch data to conduct some data limited assessments. And we have already started that process. The fishery from which we have the most data is the commercial spiny lobster fishery. Useful catch data spans back to 1996, and we also have size data collected by marine resources staff from that time until now. 2 stock assessment models, a length-based integrated mixed effects model and a Pallett-Tomlinson model were initially used to produce preliminary assessments of the stock as of 2019. And you can see on this slide the data that was used for these assessments. We had Fisher reported data from 1996 to 2019, and also observer reported data from 1996 to 2019. The stock assessments are currently being updated and the report finalized. We have also already started a stock assessment of red hine using data collected from the commercial fishery, mostly in 2021 and 2022, and data collected by marine resources staff during tagging studies in 2022. The model chosen for this assessment is called a length-based spawning potential ratio model. And you can see life history parameters that were used by the model to simulate the size distribution of an unfished population. So those include the length infinity, the length that it would reach if it just continued to grow. The K is the growth parameter. You have the length at 50% maturity population, 50% of the population is mature, and the length at which 95% of the population is mature. You have the maximum age, and you have natural mortality. And as you can see, most of these parameters came from the Caribbean. We do not have these parameters, local parameters for red parrots. We have some age data, but not enough at the moment. So the size distribution observed in the data that was collected is compared to unfished length frequency data to estimate the status of the population. This report is currently being finalized as well. Tagging data is also being analyzed to give estimates of the numbers of red hine at 2 known spawning aggregations. Efforts are also underway to gather data for a stock assessment on Black grouper. Prior to the BOP, tagging studies were conducted to understand the movements of Black grouper around spawning aggregation sites. Diving observations on the spawning aggregations were also conducted. Age data for Black grouper were also obtained using odorless or ear bones. However, critical length data is still needed before we can attempt a stock assessment. Ideally, we need to measure a few hundred groupers per year for several years for this stock assessment. I will not say much about the next few slides, but I thought it was important for you to know that a request for proposal will be issued to develop a marine resources monitoring plan to look at the effectiveness of the fully and highly protected areas. The priority will be annual monitoring of fish diversity, abundance, and biomass for 10 years. Some of this detail may change, but it is expected that various survey methods will be used for monitoring across the Bermuda platform. In addition to the studies already mentioned, there has been other research and monitoring of marine resources over the years. The department conducted a study a few years ago that looked at the life history, genetics, abundance, and distribution of Bermuda's bait fishes. And diver-based surveys of marine resources have been conducted by the BREAM program, Department of Environment and Natural Resources staff, and bioscientists that can provide useful baseline information for future surveys. BIOS has also been conducting studies of deep water fish biodiversity from approximately 100 feet to 3,200 feet, using a combination of video surveys and techniques. Another monitoring priority in the draft marine spatial plan is to look at the economic impacts of marine protected area establishment on the local tourism industry. This will be done with visitor surveys that include questions about tourists' willingness to pay for nature-based experiences to areas within fully protected areas, their prior knowledge of Bermuda's marine protected areas before visiting, and whether that impacted their choice of activity or destination, and potentially their willingness to pay an eco-tax to support ongoing conservation efforts. A supporting priority is recording the number of trips to locations in fully protected marine protected areas versus other sites, then calculating the revenues associated with those for comparison purposes. So the feedback that we've gotten so far on the draft marine spatial plan with regards to fisheries management and monitoring are to assess the fish stocks before and during implementation of protection, including participatory data limited stock assessments. To implement adaptive fisheries management informed by periodic monitoring and assessments, and update the control rules accordingly, those being catch and bag limit, seasonal closures, etc. And also stakeholders wanted us to consult with fishermen to create and implement a licensing system for recreational sport fishing. And then there was also some feedback on marine resources monitoring, and that was to develop an assessment and monitoring strategy using input from the Science Committee and recommendations from public consultation. And the strategy should also monitor marine tourism visits. And the marine resources monitoring strategy should use consistent and replicable methodologies that have been previously implemented in Bermuda. So that is a summary of the feedback that we have gotten so far. So in summary, the draft Blue Prosperity Plan has two parts, as we've been talking about for a little while now, and one of which is the Marine Spatial Plan. And this calls for a designation of 20% of Bermuda's marine waters as no-take marine protected areas. The success of these MPAs depends on adequate management and continuous monitoring and enforcement. The draft Blue Prosperity Plan is incorporating feedback to update fisheries licensing and improve fisheries monitoring, including in the areas of stock assessments, a licensing system for recreational sports fishing, adaptive fisheries management, and a marine resources and tourism monitoring strategy. I thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and we hope to hear from you soon on your thoughts.